In 1932, a tiny mountain town in Austria accidentally solved the Great Depression, and then the government found out and immediately made them stop. So let's talk about the Great Depression first, because if you think it was just a rough patch where people had to tighten their belts for a bit, you are wildly underestimating how catastrophic this actually was. It started in 1929 when the US stock market collapsed, and unlike most financial crises that kind of stay in one place and slowly get cleaned up, this one spread everywhere. Europe, Asia, South America, the entire global economy just seized up like an engine with no oil. Within months, banks started failing. In America alone, over 9,000 banks collapsed in 3 years. You'd wake up one morning, walk to your local bank, and find a locked door and a handwritten sign. Your savings, gone. Not invested badly, not tied up somewhere, just gone. Nobody was paying it back. And the government's official plan was essentially to wait and see, which as a strategy goes, was not going great. Unemployment exploded to levels that are genuinely hard to imagine today. In the United States, 1 in 4 workers had no job. Not 1 in 20, 1 in 4. Entire industries just stopped. In some cities, men who had been engineers and factory managers 6 months earlier were selling apples on street corners because that was the only work available. In Germany, it was even worse. In Austria, the country we actually care about, towns were running out of money to pay for basic things like roads and clean water. Families that had been perfectly comfortable middle class in 1928 were lining up for soup in 1931. And what made it all so maddening was that nothing was actually destroyed. The factories were still standing. The workers still existed. The fields still grew food. The only thing that stopped working was money. Specifically, the fact that people were so terrified of losing what little they had left that they were hoarding every coin and not spending anything. And when nobody spends, nobody earns. And when nobody earns, nobody spends. The whole machine just grinds to a halt and nobody can figure out how to restart it. Governments tried everything. They cut spending. It got worse. They raised interest rates. It got worse. The smartest economists in the world were sitting in very important rooms, having very important meetings, and producing absolutely nothing useful. Millions of people were standing in soup kitchen lines while the experts debated theory. It was like watching someone's house burn down while a committee argued about the chemistry of fire. Now zoom into a small railway town in the Austrian Alps called Wörgl, population 4,500. By 1932, around 400 people were unemployed, which in a town that size is basically every other family you know. The town treasury was empty, infrastructure was falling apart. Mayor Michael Unterguggenberger had a long list of things that desperately needed fixing. Roads, water pipes, drainage systems, a bridge, and exactly zero money to fix any of it. He was getting letters every week from desperate residents and had nothing to write back. Unterguggenberger was not a famous economist. He was not a banking genius or a government official with powerful connections. He was a railway worker who read economics books in his spare time and had for years been quietly obsessed with the ideas of a fairly obscure German-Argentine economist named Silvio Gesell. And Gesell had this one idea that everyone in mainstream economics thought was completely unhinged. What if money expired? Think about why people were hoarding money during the Depression. Because holding on to it felt safe. The longer you sat on it, the more control you had over an uncertain future. So what if you took that away? What if the money slowly lost value the longer you held it, say 1% per month, so that sitting on it actually cost you something? You wouldn't hoard it. You'd spend it, get rid of it, pass it on before it lost any more value. And every person you pass it to would do exactly the same thing. Suddenly, money isn't sitting under a mattress doing nothing. It's moving, fast, and a moving economy is a working economy. Unterguggenberger pitched this to the Wörgl Town Council in 1932. He wanted to print their own local currency. He called them labor certificates and used them to pay workers for public projects around town. Each note would lose 1% of its value per month, unless you bought a small stamp from the town hall and physically stuck it onto the note to keep it valid. That stamp cost the holder a tiny amount. That money went into a reserve fund backing the whole system. So every time the note changed hands, someone had to go buy a stamp to keep it alive, which meant the town was constantly collecting small fees that funded the reserve. And everyone holding the note had a direct financial incentive to get rid of it as fast as possible. The council thought he had genuinely lost his mind. Printing your own money, stamps on banknotes, money that expires like a coupon for yogurt. But they were already basically bankrupt and had run out of better ideas, so they figured, what's the worst that could happen? On July 31st, 1932, Wörgl printed its first batch of labor certificates. What happened next is genuinely one of the strangest economic success stories in recorded history. Workers start getting paid in the new currency, and because it's losing value every month, they spend it immediately at the local bakery, the butcher, the hardware shop. Those shop owners spend it on supplies rather than sit on it. The suppliers pay their workers. Those workers go buy things. The money is lapping the town over and over again, doing more and more work with every lap. In fact, the labor certificates were circulating around 13 times faster than the regular national currency, the shilling, which was still busy doing nothing in people's mattresses across the rest of Austria. Same amount of money, 13 times the economic activity. The tax revenue flooding into the town treasury meant Unterguggenberger could finally start ticking things off that list. Roads got repaved. A new bridge went up. They built a reservoir, a ski jump, and new housing. All the things that had been sitting undone for years because there was never any money. Except now, there was money. Money that nobody wanted to hold on to for too long, which meant it just kept working. 6 neighboring villages saw what was happening and quietly started running their own versions of the same system. And here's the number that makes economists go quiet when they read it. While unemployment across the rest of Austria rose by nearly 20% during this period, unemployment in Wörgl dropped by around 25%. Same country, same depression, same year. One town, completely opposite direction. When journalists started reporting on what was happening in Wörgl, people thought they were exaggerating, so economists started arriving in person to verify it with their own eyes. Then came the politicians. At one point, the Prime Minister of France, one of the most powerful men in Europe, made a personal trip to this tiny Alpine railway town because he refused to believe the reports without seeing it himself. Think about that for a second. The French Prime Minister in Wörgl, population 4,500. He stood in front of the new bridge and read the plaque Unterguggenberger had bolted onto it. It said, "This bridge was built with our own free money." By mid-1933, around 200 towns and villages across Austria wanted to copy what Wörgl had done. Unterguggenberger was speaking to packed rooms of local officials, all wanting to set up the same system. The experiment was 13 months old, it was accelerating, and it was about to go national. And then, the Austrian National Bank sent a letter. Just a letter, dated September 1st, 1933. It informed Wörgl that complementary currencies were now illegal. The monopoly on issuing currency belonged to the central bank and only the central bank. The labor certificates were to be immediately withdrawn from circulation. Wörgl took them to court. They lost. They escalated to the Austrian Supreme Court. They lost again. The certificates were pulled, the project stopped, the wages stopped, the whole thing stopped. And within months, unemployment in Wörgl was back above 30%. Now, the Austrian National Bank weren't idiots. They had real concerns. 200 towns printing their own money is a genuine headache for anyone trying to run a national monetary system. If the local currencies become more trusted than the national one, you have a very serious problem on your hands. Their reasoning made sense from where they were sitting. But here's the thing that makes this story so difficult to shake. The experiment wasn't stopped because it failed. It was stopped at the exact moment it was about to scale, because it was working too well for too many people in a way that made the central bank look completely pointless. The one man who might have pushed this idea to the level it needed to reach was an American economist named Irving Fisher, professor at Yale, arguably the most respected economic mind in the United States at the time. Fisher had been following Wörgl closely and was convinced the stamp script model was the key to breaking the Depression. He traveled, gave lectures, wrote papers, lobbied hard to get American towns to try it. Some did. Dozens of American communities ran their own versions of expiring local currency during the Depression years. But Fisher had a credibility problem that was, to put it gently, significant. He was the man who publicly announced just days before the 1929 stock market crash that stock prices had reached a permanently high plateau, and that anyone who thought a crash was coming simply didn't understand the fundamentals. He then watched his own personal fortune, the equivalent of around $140 million today, evaporate almost overnight. He spent the following years quietly borrowing money from his sister-in-law just to cover his living expenses, while publicly insisting he had the solution to the crisis he failed to predict. So when Irving Fisher stood up and told powerful people that expiring money was the answer, those people had a very easy way to smile, nod, and change the subject. The stamp script experiments in America quietly faded. The Federal Reserve made sure nothing got too far. The window closed. What's left of the Miracle of Wörgl today is mostly just that bridge, still standing, plaque still on it, built with free money in 13 months by a railway worker who read too many economics books in his spare time, and a town that had absolutely nothing to lose. The Austrian National Bank, by the way, collapsed in 1934, 1 year after shutting down the one thing in the country that was actually working. If that doesn't make you want to put your fist through a wall, honestly, nothing will. Subscribe for more stories like this, and click the next video on screen. It is equally unhinged. See you there.